Yeah, this is Antonio Moore coming to you from Tone Talks. It's a pleasure to have a great guest on today, young Ashley Williams, an activist that confronted Hillary Clinton some weeks back. And essentially, I just wanted to give her a chance to kind of have a discussion about how she sees how the primaries have went since then and how she feels activism can move forward for Black America. Anything you want to say to the audience?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so, just for those people who aren't aware, have been in a turtle shell, Ashley Williams did a wonderful job of confronting Hillary Clinton some weeks back and really bringing to the forefront of discussion about the platform that the Clintons represent as New Democrats, and also specific statements that Hillary Clinton herself had made. I'm going to pull up a video right now so that the audience can see it, and they'll be able to see what we're talking about.
South Carolina became the first state with body cameras. There's more work to be done, but got to lay down these markers. You got to build toward common sense gun reform, criminal justice reform, and all the like. So I think we've got somebody saying here, we have to bring them
apologize for mass incarceration.
Okay, we'll talk
I'm
about it.
not a super predator, Hillary Clinton.
Okay, fine, we'll talk about it.
Apologize to Black people for mass incarceration.
Well, can I talk, and then maybe you can listen to what I say? Okay, fine. Thank you very much. There's a lot of issues in this campaign. The very first speech that I gave back in April was about criminal justice reform and about
predators.
You're being rude.
It's not appropriate.
Super predators. That's rude.
This is not appropriate.
That's rude.
Yeah, you want to hear the facts, you just want to talk.
I know that you called Black youth super predators in 1994. Please explain to the record. Explain it to us. You owe Black people an apology.
Well,
Excuse us. That's
tell you what,
inappropriate.
if you will give me a chance to talk, I'll approach your subject. You know what? Nobody's ever asked me before. You're the first person to ask me, and I'm happy to address it, but you are the first person to ask me here. Okay, back to the issues. The issues that I think are...
Now, a week before Ashley did that on Huffington Post, I had written a piece. Hillary Clinton should apologize before she asked for Black Americans' vote. Basically, also like represent that same sentiment, which is essentially how we see people, and also looking at those people's past. Is there anything that really prompted you to actually step in front of Hillary and make that statement? Was it a movement? Was it an individual choice?
Well, I've always been really involved in resistance work, and my work here in the movement for Black Lives here in Charlotte has been about confronting and holding powers accountable. So whether that looked like the chief of police, or the chancellor at UNC Charlotte, or just different folks. A couple Wednesdays ago, it was Hillary Clinton, and so in that way, I don't really see what I did that night as different from the work that I've been doing.
Okay. And when you actually like look at Hillary Clinton and look at that platform, do you separate her from her husband, or do you see them as one unit, or do you see them as a unit with the New Democrat platform? How do you see it?
I look at the things that they've supported and also the policies that they've helped pass. So in that, I think that, there's some common ground that, the 1994 crime bill, they both supported that. The way in which they supported it is different, but I think that they still supported it in whatever lanes they were in at the time. And now that she's running for president, not having anything to do with him necessarily, I'm going to hold her accountable for the things that she supported and also, the things that she did while she was serving as Secretary of State.
No, I definitely agree. And I have to say, so often what we're seeing is one that people want to kind of compartmentalize her actually in an odd way into the role of a traditional first lady. And then secondly, this wasn't just the crime bill, it was the welfare bill, it was the Telecom Act. So many people don't talk about the Telecom Act from 96, where essentially it killed Black radio and Black media, which was our voice for these issues. So many people don't talk about the Welfare Act, the welfare bill. And like it's funny because they're in South Carolina. You're in North Carolina. In South Carolina, there was a State of the Union from the governor, and this is 2 years after the welfare bill, and it's in '98. And I actually was shared it with Michelle Alexander, who we'll talk about in a second. And what the governor is touting in this bill is that welfare in South Carolina has cut half the people off of welfare and re-employed. And he takes two examples, two African American women, and he basically touts that he's re-skilled them. And guess what job? Correctional officer. So basically, they've been cut off welfare and become correctional officers. And fundamentally, this is the platform that kind of came out of the Clinton era that so often is forgotten. One of the things that I've really talked to Michelle Alexander of the new Jim Crow about is the concept that the Clintons brought a great economy to the forefront for Black America. When in actuality, I mean, of course, if you take like a large percentage of people, put them in jail, now they aren't unemployed as far as like by the books. Now they aren't out to say that I'm poor, so then your numbers, of course, look better. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. Because unemployment, it's actually a trip because with unemployment, they don't count people in prison. So like when you sent,
right.
When you sent those African American men to prison, they were still unemployed. They're just unemployed in prison. You didn't fix that, and also they employed white people by going to prison, as
right.
prison guards and everything of the sort. And so like when you deal with the concept of a super predator, what did that make you think of? Because I have to say, like, what was most poignant about your activism was that it was just so, I would call it intimate, because it was like so close. Usually you don't get that close to a candidate, and then for her to have read her words again as though she didn't recognize them made you want to use that particularly.
Yeah, so we have to bring them to heel, but super predator is in the same speech, and I mentioned super predator during the action. So, like, what I think is interesting about this language is that, it was the language of the day, and it's still the language that's being used today to kind of pathologize and demonize the actions of Black people and other people of color. So, I've been asked if I thought that I was out of touch or out of place by, like, attributing that word to meaning a certain thing. But, like, we know what that word means. Like, as a Black person living in the South, like, I could be characterized as a super predator by the Charlotte Observer tomorrow. So this kind of language is not new to me, and it's also not new to or criminalize or pathologize people of color. So what I really wanted to do with the words that I used to super predator and we have to bring them to heel was like, I just wanted to confront her with her own words. We have to bring them to heel. We specifically wrote those words for her to be confronted with, because we felt like it would be harder for people to say that we mischaracterized those things. Like, there ain't no way around that.
No.
We went between those super predator and we have to bring them to heel. And we were like, okay, which one are we going to write on this? Which one is going to do the most damage? And so at the end of the day, we chose we have to bring them to heel for the same kind of issues that we ran into after the fact with super predator. And really, we have to bring them to heel. There were people who were still denying that was racially coded, which is ridiculous.
And I mean, just the concept of that being misunderstood in the South, let alone across America, after the history we've had, and just the idea of breaking an animal and then breaking an individual. And so, right. Let me ask you this question. Hillary has gotten all this support by the mothers of the shot Black boys, and how do you see that in context of this greater image of the super predator? I mean, here we have the great contradiction whereby that language, not in and of itself, but in conjunction with bills like the crime bill, created the environment for their young sons to be viewed as quote unquote super predators. And does that lead necessarily directly to the shooting? Not necessarily, but it definitely plays its role. And I guess, how do you see them supporting her as they are right now?
Yeah, so I see the Clinton legacy as one of courting Black voters and selling out Black communities. That's what the Clintons do for a living. That's how they rose to the top, by selling out Black communities and other communities of color. So I'm not really surprised that a lot of Black people are supporting her at this point. Sandra Bland's mom went on Democracy Now! I think yesterday, kind of vehemently saying that, she has autonomy and she has a lot of agency, and she's supporting Hillary Clinton for, her own reasons. And so while I don't want to take away the agency and the autonomy of, other Black women, standing up for whoever they want to vote for, I think it's important that we like go back to what people's records are, and I think it's interesting that like the words that Hillary Clinton used and the policies that she supported, like if those Black children would have been alive today, they could have been incarcerated by that same logic, by Hillary Clinton herself, by Bill Clinton himself, by the legacy of the Clintons. So I think that's really interesting that, you know, people are supporting her, especially people whose children have died because of the cops.
Yeah. And I just think there's a lot of general ignorance about the Clintons. I'm using ignorance because I just think it's lack of knowledge about their history. I mean, and it's funny because you're seeing this divide in Black America of young voters and older voters, and a lot of it comes down to what I believe is the internet technology and just being brought to an awareness about what we actually are getting for our vote. And so, have you seen a lot of that down in, particularly being in North Carolina, where it's like old people are saying just follow the Democratic road, and you guys are saying no, we actually want to see what their positions are, and there's just a divide. Do you see that?
Definitely, and furthermore than like look at what their issues are, acknowledge that their issues haven't been about us, and take your support away. So there's a lot of talk about the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. Like what I think we're saying now, what I'm saying now is that I'm not really sure that any of those parties support what my interests are, and so I don't feel the need to say anything about either of them at this point.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I sent you an article from the New York Times yesterday. When will the Black Revolt happen in the Democratic Party is the general pretense of the article. And it's kind of looking at the fact that blacks actually have it substantially worse than working class whites. And working class whites, with a taste of it, are revolting against the Republican Party, or the establishment, I should say, and saying, you will represent our interests, not your own. And Black America has failed to do that. That's the crux of the article. And, me, myself, I definitely see that. You look at, he said one of the indicators you look at is child poverty, child homelessness. And, it's just horrible, the numbers that you see right now with Black America. I write on wealth all the time. I did a piece actually 2 days ago where CNN did a broadcast, and they showed the top 10% of Americans control 75% of the wealth. Now, that's the highest of all developed countries. All developed countries. The next three closest countries were Sweden, Denmark, and I think it was Finland. All homogeneous countries. Now, what's interesting is that all 10% of those people are white. Almost 98% of... And so, what does that mean for our interests and our needs and our wants for our children and our, and ourselves? And I think that, when I come back to the question I asked you 2 questions back about the mothers, I'm kind of confronted with the question of why are they at the forefront of black, the black message. You don't see that with Sandy Hook, or you don't see that. Why is it that identity politics or celebrity plays, and I call it celebrity because it kind of is that, where people who take a heightened stance in Black America get a chance to speak more than your academians, more than your activists. Whereas in other groups, you can have a Rush Limbaugh, or you can have characters that actually going to speak to specific nuanced positions. Because we're not talking about gun control with these mothers. Sandy Hook, they might talk to the parents, and they're considered a Sandy Hook block kind of about gun control.
Yeah.
Here you're talking to the 3 mothers of who got shot about how Black America should support kind of Hillary Clinton.
I understand what you're saying, but I think I don't want to trivialize the deaths of these Black women's children by saying they're not knowers, in the same way that a Rush Limbaugh or a Glenn Beck is considered a knower to a white person, or to Fox News, or to white America, right? So I think there's a way to talk about who gets to be a knower in terms of what's happening with the movement for Black lives and other movements. And so I think it's important that those women are having a platform that they probably have never had before, that we as regular people in America have never seen Black women occupy. That's really important to me. At the end of the day, how they decide to do their agency and do their autonomy in terms of who they support is up to them. But I still think it's really important for them to have a voice. And I don't know that I would say that I think that they are the voice for the movement.
Well, I mean, if you look at it, they were brought out that way. They were not they were brought out as the four vocal points for Black America in so many ways. The way that the Clintons set it up. I understand what you're saying as individuals. If they actually just say wrote an op-ed or came on an interview, But like the way that this all goes down, and we've seen this before, where celebrity or status actually is used to kind of like funnel the rest of Black America to follow that message. And like in so many words, it's not like they specifically said Clinton stands for this policy. I really like this policy. This is why I'm standing with Hillary Clinton. It's more just
why do you support Hillary Clinton? Not like the first thing that she's going to do is not necessarily come out and say those things. Just like, you know, we don't need to blindly support Hillary Clinton. We need to ask her why she thinks, you know, she deserves our vote. That's a responsibility that I think we have too, because the media is going to do whatever it's going to do. The news is going to do whatever it's going to do. How they characterize the movement, they're going to do whatever they want. So, like, at some point, we have to kind of take responsibility and say, like, no, we resist this. Like, we resist that idea. And I think that there's room to say, like, we don't think that way. Like, these Black women, and they have these ideas. Like, they don't speak for everyone. And I'll say that because, like, that's something that happened after I interrupted Hillary. The media really wanted to paint me as, like, okay, there's this Black person, and, like, they're not in line with other Black people. Like, their ideas are way out. Like, other Black people support Hillary Clinton, so who's this random person? So the idea was to, like, say, like, this is an outlier. Like, whatever her ideas are just, like, random.
And that's my point, and that's kind of my point to you. Is like I get what you're saying. If it wasn't like a media slant to the whole thing, and so like my position is like, in conjunction with what we just talked about the super predator line and the reality of what the super predator line did, to not address that core like conundrum with your stance is a fundamental problem. Like it's one thing if Hillary never said that, and then they stood with her and you just didn't like her economic policy. But for her to say that, and then you stand with her, and it's kind of like, I would think that you at least need to say, well, that, I don't know. I mean, I get your point.
I get what you're saying, but, like, also Hillary Clinton has not clarified a lot of things for her. Like, she hasn't apologized for mass incarceration. Like, the whole super predator thing, she says she wouldn't use those words today. Not that she wouldn't support those policies. She wouldn't use those words. Like, she has been really ambiguous about what she actually meant. And so what I'm saying is that, like, I want to hear from her. To hear anything from Sandra Bland, because Sandra Bland's mom didn't say that stuff. Hillary Clinton said it. So I need to hear from her. I need to hear from Trump what he meant by punching in the face. You know, like...
And that's kind of my point, is the use of surrogates are just known as a historical tool in Black America. And these surrogates allow you not to have to say those things. Because you're still... Like, the whole goal is to get a vote. So if you can use these people to get a vote without having to answer the hard question that Ashley Williams just put to you, you can place Ashley Williams as an outlier that much easier. So their positioning allows you to be positioned as an outlier instead of the normal reality, which is, no, it's a lot of people actually standing on that same position that believe there was a fundamental choice to make, you know, African-American young men the scapegoat for so many of America's core problems. And so, like, that's my conundrum with it all, is like, I think that I do get your position that they have every right, but I think that the way that the game is being played, they're being positioned to counteract the power of, say, the message that you had, or the message that Michelle Alexander had, or the message that I had. Did you have a chance to read Michelle Alexander's piece in the New Republic?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, I got a chance to hook you guys up via email, and I've been talking to her quite regularly, actually this morning as well. And one of the things that she really wanted to ask you, and you know, you can't speak for activists as a whole, but you can't speak for yourself. What did you think about her, meaning Hillary Clinton at this time, going ahead and actually issuing an apology on Nancy Reagan with the AIDS thing? She was very clear on her apology with that, with Nancy Reagan and that whole bit.
I think that like a lot of white people were upset about that, and so she felt the need to do something about it. And I think a lot of Black people and people of color are upset about mass incarceration, and she ain't gonna do nothing about it. Like, I think it's real simple. I think, you know, AIDS, and it's interesting because of when we look at who AIDS disproportionately affects, it is people of color. And we're the same folks that can't get an answer and an apology for mass incarceration. So that's really interesting to me. I think it's really unfortunate that she feels like responsible, and also like acknowledges that she might have said the wrong thing or done the wrong thing or supported the wrong idea, and she can't say that about this. And I think that what's at stake is different. I don't want to say it's greater or less, but I think it's different. Like, if you're wrong, if you like supported mass incarceration and you're wrong, like that's heavy. And so I can understand why she isn't trying to apologize at this time. Like, I get it, but, like, it's still not okay.
Yeah, because, like, in my view, like, I think, and I've said this before, it's more than an apology. I think that everybody thinks that, oh, you're asking for an apology. The thing is, when a president apologizes, that means that, especially at this level, there's a requisite requirement to correct. And so, like, her sidestepping is more than just, I don't know if I was wrong or this. She knows her position on it. She just knows that if she actually apologizes for this, she would have to do things that inequivalent with what Bernie is saying. Where Bernie's saying, I'll let out, like, I'm letting them out, like half the prisoners and things of the sort. And so, now with what happened yesterday with Bernie losing Ohio, I mean, he gets his proportional votes. What do you think about her being the presumptive nominee for the Democrats and how that bodes with you and for Black America?
It's a problem for me. I think it's a problem for us. I think that, so I'm going to speak for myself. I cannot afford to have her be the nominee. I cannot afford to have her be president. Because the policies that she supported in the past have affected people in my community in a negative way. It's not hard. Mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex are not like educational policy issues for Black people. They're not. Like, they remove people out of their communities, like, in a real material way. Yeah. And so I want to make that clear. Like, I'm a human being just like everyone else, and I really can't afford to see another person removed from my community.
Yeah, and it's a trip because, just as important, I'm going to say, they actually move economics as well. I showed in my piece how, like, part of what was happening was that we had farms dying and we had farmers out of work, and so you put a prison there instead of, now he got a job to be a prison guard. And so, like, people don't know that part, or prison gerrymandering, the idea that you don't have enough votes in a certain area, so you build the prison there, and now everybody around the prison gets to use the prisoner votes to increase their own vote, in effect.
Yeah,
and
it's pretty wild.
It's pretty wild, and people have, like, no clue about it. And I guess this is the other question that Michelle really wanted me to ask you, which is, what are the next steps to push Hillary further? Because since then, everybody's protesting in Chicago. We'll talk about that in the protesting Trump. But the advocacy for protesting Hillary has kind of, like, died out in a sense. And so, like, what are the next steps to push Hillary further, in your mind?
I think that, we have to do what we did in the first place, which was identify that there was a problem. Like, people are saying, because Bernie's not doing very well, all right, like, we just have to give it up, like, we just have to accept it. But I would like to think that we can still continue to resist in the way that we've resisted before. Me interrupting Hillary wasn't the first time that somebody probably got escorted out of a Hillary Clinton event. You know what I'm saying? Like, Sister Soldier did it in the 90s to Bill. Like, this isn't new. I think the media is kind of sensationalizing movement work in a lot of different ways, and sometimes it has good consequences and sometimes it has bad consequences. What I do hope, though, is that people kind of use this momentum to continue to get involved.
And I guess for me, I don't know if I've been around the criminal justice system something heavy for a while, and for me, I think that with incarceration, it was such a unique like issue. Even though I use this example. I mean, you get cancer, your grandma comes and visits you. She has to come and visit you, but she still doesn't have cancer. The way that they kind of like instituted incarceration is that it became so focused on like young Black males. And I wrote a piece actually where I showed the rates, and like we've never seen anything like it in any industrialized country in the history of the modern world. And like it's a trip because for me, incarceration has been a personal story because I look like an incarcerated person. Sure. Just that. And like I have to wonder whether everyone sees incarceration the way you see it if they don't know friends, like people that look like them that have been to jail. Because like even like we look at African American women, there are many African American women on probation, but as far as actually incarceration, the rate is really, really low. So it's like when do we get to a point where people go beyond just like their personal experience and say this is just morally wrong, and say I absolutely can't stand with this, even though it's being pitched to me a certain way. You know what I'm saying?
I think so. I'm thinking about this is done, and also Assata Shakur and how they've written about the prison industrial complex and how it has ties to chattel slavery and capitalism. And so we have to acknowledge that, like, without the institution of slavery, and so we can think about mass incarceration today as like an extension of slavery, right? Like, the United States needed slavery to stay afloat. And so, you know, we could say the same thing about prisons. Like, we need private prisons to, like, be a thing. Or a lot of people are...
They will be out of work.
A check. And so, right. So I think, like, and then, so another thing I think is interesting, like, the way that the way slavery played out, like, the prison industrial complex. I think that it's hard for us to be able to tell what the negative consequences are going to be. So we can say what it looks like today, right? But in 20 years, we're unsure. We can say it might get worse, right? But we're still unsure. And so I think that, you know, back in 1994, a lot of Black people were supporting that crime bill, right? That would incarcerate Black people at just these ridiculous rates. And I think, and you know, someone asked me, like, do you think that it's because they didn't know how much harm that it was going to do? And so, I mean, I think we have to get to a point and say, like, it's bad enough right now, so we want to do something right now. I think we're not at that point yet, unfortunately, but, like, I'm hoping that the work that I do and the work that others have been doing is going to show people, like, we have to stand up and we have to make something different happen right now.
No, I get what you're saying, and I guess I like speaking in numbers, and, like, I've shared this before in a couple pieces. I did a piece on the griot that actually connected slavery and Jim Crow all the way through. And one of the things that's interesting is, like, one of the highest incarceration rates. Well, let me start. A normal incarceration rate is like 130 per 100,000, something like that. One of the highest we've ever seen is during apartheid. Young South African males were incarcerated at a rate of about 830 per 100,000, which is extremely high. Today, young Black men, ages 20 to 39, are incarcerated at a rate of 10,000 per 100,000. And so I can't say... See, I guess for me, it's not a matter of it not being too bad. It's just not too bad for this other person. And so, like, fundamentally, it's like a trip when I hear people talk about a coming collapse. Because like, for me and for the people that look like me, it's been collapsed for about 15 to 20 years. And then when we talked about it, it felt like in so many ways, people were dismissive is the best way to put it.
Right.
Like, you know... Or they're always trying to make up a reason, like, of why it all happened, meaning he had to have done something wrong. They don't just put people in jail for nothing. And so, like, when I come back to the activism of what you said would bring them to heal, I have to wonder whether part of the bring them to heal was this whole, like actual elongated mission of incarceration, not just like the instantaneously part of going into jail, and also the impact that has on a broader base of African American men and how they see themselves, you know?
Yeah, that's really significant. And I think, like, so the numbers that you are talking about, and the numbers that, like, haven't changed, right, that continue to increase and get worse in different ways, those, like, that doesn't necessarily make it any easier for people to understand, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And then when you think about what we talked about earlier in terms of there are Black women who are supporting someone who had something to do with numbers going up, it makes it even more confusing. So, I mean, it's rough. Like, it's rough. We're getting a lot of different messages, and we are experiencing, I don't want to say we're experiencing really different things. We're experiencing mass incarceration in a similar way. But we're getting different messages from each other and from people outside of our communities. Right.
Yeah. And I guess one of the last things that I wanted to ask you about is not so much your thoughts on Trump, if you want to add that in, but more so, you know, Trump has been framed as everything from a fascist to a nationalist. And, you know, in many ways, you can see nationalism in his message. You know, Black people have decided to become part of the protests. I've read mixed messages from the audience, but as far as, like, Trump himself, his major, like, issues have been with Muslims and with Latinos. When I look at some of his other statements, he's been very, very quick to bring up the dynamics of what Black people got from even, say, President Obama. And so I guess my question to you is, what do you think about the amount of activism we saw in Chicago? Was it warranted? And how should Black people look to see or view, like, Trump and his movement? Or, I know it's a broad-based question.
We should take it serious. We should continue to, like, resist the things that we are not okay with. And I'd like to also say that I think sometimes you have to meet violence with the same level of violence or more violence than what you're getting, especially when it comes from these like sources of power, whether that be patriarchy, white people, white supremacy, capitalism. Like the interactions and the rallies that he has and the things that he says are violent. And so I'm not surprised that people are kind of taking matters into their own hands. I hope to see more people get involved. I think that something that this has showed me on a real basic level is like it's important to just keep showing up. Like even if you don't yell at anybody or even if you don't yell about anything when you get there, like show up, because your physical presence is also saying that like you're not okay with this. So you don't always have to like take a banner out of your bra or like pay $500 to get into a private fundraiser. Sometimes you just have to show up and like show that you're here and you're not going to stand for that.
And so like,
yeah.
And so focusing in on that, like, do you, confronted with the real possibility of Trump and Hillary, do you feel like black people should be protesting both of them? Should be okay. And why do you feel that way?
Because we can't afford to have either of them be president. People power. I think that this election season has represented the failures of the Republican Party, the failures of the Democratic Party, the failures of this two-party system. So now it's time for something else completely.
Yeah, and it's interesting that people look at the, especially our people, meaning African Americans, they kind of see it as Democrat good, Republican bad, and it's so much more about like platforms and coalitions that actually back these parties. And you're seeing a major transition moment. And you have to wonder whether Black America is like missing it altogether in their blind support of, say, like Hillary Clinton, and in that they're not actively saying, not just what can you do for me, first recognize what you've done to me. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And that's the gist of what I wanted to go through. I appreciate you coming on, talking to me. Definitely keep up the activism. And keep up pushing, all of these candidates, and at the local level as well as the national level. And I'm gonna have this up pretty soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.